Hello, I'm the Dark Master, and welcome back to my video game reviews. And in today's review, we shall be continuing with the Kirby series as we cover the 9th spin-off game in the Kirby series and the 16th game in the Kirby series overall, and the only game made for the GameCube, that being none other than Kirby Air Ride, or as it's known in Japan as Kirby Air Ride, though the space between air and ride are gotten rid of. For some reason, a lot of people call it Kirby's Air Ride, though I guess that's technically not correct. This game is the only racing game in the series and is widely considered the most in-depth of all of Kirby's non-2D platforming spin-offs and is widely enjoyed by many in the fan base. But is it all just nostalgia talking, or is there a genuine gem in this game? Well, as always, let us start, as we always do, with the game's developmental history, and then see how the game itself stacks up. Alright, so this game's development history is actually rather interesting, starting long before you'd think. First, it was meant to be a Nintendo 64 game, and indeed, it was one of the first gameplay demos for the console alongside Super Mario 64, first seen in the 1995 Nintendo Space World, or at the time, Shoshinkai Show, as it was called. At this time, it was very rough, being only 2 sub-games. The first was an interesting concept, seemingly inspired by Marble Madness, which was an old Atari game that involved a marble guided through various levels. And while info is limited, it seems to have functioned similar to that game, as well as being similar to the earlier Kirby's Dream Course, which I've reviewed before if you'd like to learn more about that game, so check that video out. This reflected further in how this demo was referred to as Kirby's Bowl 64, or Kirby Ball 64, which Kirby Ball being the Japanese name for Kirby's Dream Course. Nothing really came of it, though. The second mode, however, showed something much more in line with the final game, with a snowboarding race that saw Kirby collecting various stars for points. It had a long and troubled history, as when it was shown again in 1996, it had become much more of a skateboarding simulator. In the end, in 1998, the Nintendo 64 game was stalled/cancelled due to console limitations and development issues. However, the game's development started back up again for the GameCube in 2000 or so. This was done in order to create a more robust lineup of Kirby games to coincide with the anime's release, alongside Kirby and the Amazing Mirror and Kirby's Nightmare and Dreamland, which I reviewed last time, so check that out if you want to learn more about it. A racing game was decided that it would be easier to make compared to a more traditional platformer. This can be seen in some of the music, which also appears in the anime, which we shall discuss much later in the video. This game was also the last one that Masahiro Sakurai played an active role in the development of. The man had rightfully grown tired of the industry's desire for constant sequels, going independent afterwards. Despite this, he really gave this his all for this game, as it went under a lot of developmental changes over time. Sakurai's commitment to quality can be seen in his belief in the fundamental concept of drifting in a racing game, while also not wishing to pressure players into perfection by improving their fastest times by using the same strategy perfectly over and over again. And this led to an overall easy feeling of the game. Of course, this hasn't stopped, speedrunners from trying to do that, but, definitely he went for a more casual feel. Development All right, as assets were made, but Sakurai couldn't get the game to work right, as none of the vehicles really controlled well. So they decided to restart work from the ground up. Though, thanks to reusing graphical assets, allowed it to be finished in a little over 3 months. Aside from Sakurai, you also had Hirokazu as the sound composer alongside Shogo Sakai, Idashi Ikigama, and Jun Ishikawa. In the end, it would be released on July 11th, 2003 in Japan, then October 13th, 2003 in North America, February 27th, 2004 in the EU, and March 30th, 2004 in Australia slash Oceania. It had a really cool pink disc. I always liked how the GameCube discs had this sort of dynamic art to it. And it sold reasonably well with 422,311 copies sold in Japan and 7,500,000 in the United States of America, but had a mixed critical reception for reasons that I'll get into later. Now, however, I think it's time to actually start discussing the game itself, starting with the story, which is what I normally say, but there is no story mode in this game, which will cause issues as we'll get to later. But let us instead be heading arguably right into the most important aspect of really any game, the gameplay. Alright, so do you know the basics of a racing game where you and a group of friends, or if you're a lonely boozer, CPUs, and you try and get first place in a series of races? If I wanted a brief, I could just say that what some older reviewers of the game say and call it Mario Kart as a clone, but I think that genuinely overlooks the sheer uniqueness of this game's gameplay. Let us start with the basic controls before going on to the specifics of the game's three modes. Alright, so the basic control scheme is actually very simple, using the control stick and A button. Unlike in other racing games, the player has no need for acceleration, as in most cases you go forwards automatically. Instead, the control stick handles steering, both on the ground and while you're gliding in the air. You can also perform a quick spin by quickly tapping left to right. This does slow you down, but allows you to attack nearby enemies and players. The A button, meanwhile, is used for various things, but most importantly for braking, which not only helps turn but also builds up power in a charging bar, which, if full, causes you to burst forwards. This is very useful in courses with a lot of tight corners like Machine Passage, but not so much on courses with long straight regions like Nebula Belt, which is a course that sees the air ride machine you ride moving, parts that are basically akin to Rainbow Road. Speaking of air ride machines, these are the equivalent of carts in Mario Kart, serving as the vehicles, and there are 20 of which, some of which are exclusive to certain modes. Starting with the base Warp Star. This is the vanilla ice cream of the game, and is the default slash first machine you get. It's fine, no big abilities or flaws, but it gets the job done well enough. Next is the Turbo Star, which, true to its name, has high speed charge, which for the context of this game refers to the speed that it takes for the boost bar to be filled up. And seems great, right? But its turning is just awful. Like, it turns more gradual at higher speeds and much sharper at slow speeds, which just feels wrong. It can be unlocked by riding each of the three rails in magma flows at least once while also finishing in first place, which is kind of hard to do on the base tracks, but I'll get on that later. Luckily, the next machine is really good. The Formula Star has the best top speed of all the standard machines, with good HP, defense, and offense. It's great in City Trial, but the weak turning and acceleration does render it not as good in the air ride mode, outside of like Nebula Belt. The Slick Star is literally a soap bar with absolutely horrible traction, but good at gliding and being the second best in the game, in fact, and decent speed plus acceleration. But if you can't stand poor traction, this is just trash. Though it's easy to unlock, with you having to beat a 2 lap race in checker nights under 3 minutes 5 seconds, which you'll probably do in by accident. The Swerve Star's alright, mostly notable for its need to stop and charge or glide in order to turn. Surprisingly, it is one of my favorites in the game, which is odd given it is the most unconventional in the entire game. It can be unlocked by beating Sky Sands in under 2 minutes 5 seconds. Do this as soon as possible if you want to have an easy time beating future stages. The Wagon Star, though, complete garbage. It is completely unable to boost. Who thought this was a cool idea? You'll unlock it by beating the goal of any course in any mode other than free run 3 times, but I never use this. It's just awful. The Bulk Star is okay. It's the most durable machine, having the highest HP out of, you know, the base machines outside of the legendary ones, which we'll get to. Meaning it can be good in the more combat centric nature of City Trial, but in actual standard racing, it's pretty mediocre due to its poor boosting ability and how it will come to a dead stop. It can be unlocked by beating Celestial Valley in under 3 minutes 20 seconds, which is relatively possible. But honestly, outside of City Trial, I don't really think that you necessarily need to play this one. It's just fine. Going to the Shadow Star, it's a relatively okay vehicle, but I don't really like the weak defenses it has, and it does hamper it in the city trial. It, alongside 3 other machines, also cameoed in the last two-parter of the Kirby anime, which is a cool crossover, and I will review those episodes in the future. The Shadow Star can be unlocked by defeating 10 enemies using quick spins. The Winged Star has the best glide in the game outside of the legendary machines, meaning on some tracks it is amazing, and it can be obtained by finishing first in any course while airborne, which should be done unintentionally given how often it happened to me. The Rocket Star, true to its name, has the highest boosting ability of all the machines, but all of the other attributes are kinda mediocre, meaning it's pretty bad with most standard races, but can be used well in City Trial. It is unlocked by beating 1 lap in less than 1 minute 5 seconds in free run of Machine Passage. It's okay, but just very situational in my experience. Same with the Jet Star, which has its top speed go up in the air. Its charge rate speeds up in the air, and it gets acceleration from a perfect landing, and admittedly has the third highest gliding ability outside of the wheelie scooter. Strangely, though, it has some of the lowest speed in the game, which is very unusual and makes it not very useful in flat courses. It can be unlocked by racing in Machine Passage for 2 minutes. The last 3 machines, not limited to a specific mode or being a special case, are wheelies, all of which, being wheelies, share similar weaknesses. Since they use an actual wheel as opposed to floating, they can't really glide, but instead jump, more akin to a standard racer, and are more susceptible to ground hazards like snow and magma. On the flip side, they can use dash panels and switches without the need to touch the ground using a charge. The 3 do have distinct traits, but I do generally like all of them, though some admittedly are better than others. The standard wheelie is the first to be unlocked by racing on all 8 courses available during the beginning of the game. It is the most average of the bikes, admittedly slightly less than the standard Warp Star in terms of handling, but that is more than made up for it with a slightly higher speed, and I enjoy using it. The wheelie scooter has the best gliding and jumping in the game outside of one of the legendary machines. Sadly, this is Also, a machine that has a very low top speed, a low level of health, very low offensive and defensive capabilities. Lastly, it is also very lightweight, meaning that it can be knocked around easily. Despite this, I find it fun to engage with and is the bike that has attained the best time on nearly all courses in the speedrunning community. To unlock this, the player must begin the final lap of any course in ninth place, but finish in first. Interestingly, it was referenced in the two-parter Born to Be Mild, which is an episode that I look forward to reviewing. The last wheelie, the Rex wheelie, is a beefy fellow with a high top speed, great offense and defense, but is held back with poor handling, slow charging, and below average acceleration, as well as short jumps. It also only has just average health. In a typical racing setting, it does have some use, but it's not that good. But in City Trial, in my experience, it is just amazing there. But the next four machines are all exclusive to City Trial. And let's go to these now. The Compact Star is the starting machine everyone starts with in City Trial. It's alright, basically just the, standard Warp Star, but with slightly lower health, offense, and defense, but amazing turning, charging, and gliding. It's okay, nothing astounding, and you'll definitely try to get rid of it as soon as possible. The second normal one is the Flight Warp Star, which closely resembles the Warp Star, and according to the lore, is actually a prototype with an orangish hue. It, much like the Compact Star, is okay, but has a superior gliding ability than the base Warp Star, with a marginally worse turning capacity that I didn't really feel while playing, so yeah, it's okay. The last two machines are truly amazing, being described in game as legendary. First is the Hydra, a real tank that has the highest speed in the game. It really is overpowered, and as such can only be used in City Trial by collecting 3 parts. But to be unlocked, it requires 3 challenges to be completed, including killing 150 foes in Destruction Derby, destroying all of the dilapidated houses in City Trial, and defeating over 1,500 enemies in Kirby Melee. It's great, but it's surpassed in my view by the famous Dragoon. Yes, that one from the Super Smash Bros. Series. It, much like Hydra, is broken into 3 pieces which must be collected. It is pretty much a perfect machine that will basically ensure your victory. There's really no issue of it, outside of, getting it. The last two machines I'll save for when I discuss the game mode Top Ride, since they are explicitly tied to it and really don't stand on their own to the same extent as these other ones do. Instead, let us now go over the two other playable characters that are basically their own air ride machines. First, you got Deity, who rides a special wheelie, and as such has all the traits of wheelies, aka, the weaknesses I talked about earlier. He, however, has slightly higher health, as well as weight, offense, and top speed, but has slightly lower acceleration, turning, and jumping. He can also hit, opponents with his hammer. I think he's fine, but he's not my favorite of the options here, and I can understand why a lot of people don't really enjoy playing as him. But frankly, of the two additional characters, my favorite is Meta Knight. He doesn't actually fly a machine, but instead uses his own wings, a lot like the wing copy ability in this game. He uses Galaxia as a weapon, much like the sword copy ability, to slash at foes and enemies. Meta Knight also has pretty great top speed, excellent turning, and amazing acceleration, but he can't boost properly, and oddly, despite possessing wings, his gliding abilities are only just a little above average. Overall, the selection of options in this game are alright. Sure, there are some stinkers, and a number are overly specialized or only useful in certain niche applications, but I think people will find what they want to use very easy as there's enough to work with. But if you were paying attention, you'll notice I referenced copy abilities, and indeed, this game does have 11, and they function a lot like the items in Mario Kart. Kirby must inhale an enemy by pressing A near them rapidly. If they have no ability, like say Waddle Dee, Kirby will then spit them out as a star bullet that will home in on the nearest enemy or player, like the red shell. The copy abilities are more complicated, but still all limited for a certain period of time, or in some cases single use, which does admittedly hamper a few of them. Let us discuss them going from the worst to the best. Sleep has Kirby fall asleep, which makes him lose control of his vehicle due to the loss of, being awake. Completely useless, though it can wear off quicker if the player wiggles the control stick, and you can potentially make other opponents fall asleep if you touch them, but that's not useful most of the time. Freeze can create a freezing aura. It's alright, but the short range makes it very limited in usefulness. Needle Kirby is very similar to Ice, but slightly better because unlike Ice, it can damage opponents passively without the need to activate it. So it's marginally a little better, but again, due to its short range, it's really not all that fun or impactful. Sword is a bit better as it activates faster and can hit multiple targets at once. It's honestly the best of the purely short ranged abilities, but again, due to its short range, it's not the best and is still a little limited. Mike is a lot more useful due to having the largest range of the abilities, but has only mid damage, so it's not really much of a game changer. Bomb sees Kirby toss a single bomb. Yeah, just one. But it does have a big blast radius, but the fact that there's only one being tossed, I think, really hampers how useful this ability can be, as it can be dodged relatively easy by even the most incompetent of people, unless they're in a right time area. I really wish they had given Bomb Kirby multiple bombs. It would have made him more useful. The fire ability is basically a superior bomb, allowing Kirby to shoot multiple fireballs that only can, damage opponents directly. They also create a sort of burning residue that can also damage. It's arguably the best ability in the game, and while it's not my personal favorite, I definitely see its appeal. The next three copy abilities are more movement related. Tornado gives Kirby a more powerful quick spin that can be done in midair and damages opponents. It's fine and helps with air control, and I really enjoy utilizing it. The wheel ability functions like the bullet bill item in Mario Kart, as you vroom forwards, automatically activating any, ground-based switches, as well as hurting anyone it rolls into. The wing cop ability causes Kirby to go into the air, acting kind of like Meta Knight, but can also send opponents flying upwards into the air using his quick spin. I enjoy all three of these guys, but honestly, wheel and wing are rather utilitarian, and I can't really speak much about them as I don't really have much to say about them. But the last cop ability, Plasma, is my personal favorite. It functions much like in Kirby Superstar, which I've reviewed before, so check that video out if you want to learn more. But basically, by wiggling the control stick, you build up energy, which can be at 5 levels of charge, from a group of small beams to 3 straight moving sparks to a single homing spark, and then, when maxed out, a homing ball of electric doom. It's very fun to use, and makes me wish the copy builders were not so limited in terms of time. Overall, the abilities in the game are good, but I don't think they will change any race you're in. Truly, this isn't like Mario Kart where a red shell can make or break a race. Now let's go on to the game mode. First is Air Ride, which is the main game mode and the most straightforward. So in terms of just racing, then there are 3 sub modes within this Air Ride. Air Ride is basically a normal race. Free Run is where you can play a course solo, basically a practice run, and Time Attack, which is pretty self-explanatory, where you got to beat something in a set amount of time. You can alter the settings to alter runs, laps, time, damage, enemies, course selection, even the speed of the game. There are 9 courses to choose from, but the other 2 modes are far more interesting to talk about. First is Top Ride, a simple top-down game where you ride one of the two machines through a simple course. The freestar goes in the direction the control stick is facing, while the steer star turns only to the left and right directions when pressed, like in the base game. Honestly, this is awful. Just use the free star. Trust me, overall, it's a fine game mode, but pretty short, and there really isn't much to talk about. It's basically a glorified mobile game. Perfectly solid, has some interesting stuff in terms of some of the visuals I'll talk about later, but you'll quickly see everything there is to see. The third mode, City Trials, by far, however, the most interesting and deep of them, as instead of pure racing experience, you start out in a sort of open world type thing with a very unusual city where you try to get a better vehicle as well as improve the machine's attributes by collecting patches. You also have to deal with a bunch of other players which can destroy your machine, as well as various events like Dynablade, who acts like Godzilla. Hit her on the head enough, though, and you get some patches. There is the air ride formation, which sees a group of random machines appear in the air that if you knock out of the air, you can get. There's fake items, are pretty self-explanatory, which causes a bunch of fake patches that can damage the machine to come up. Fog summons a dense fog. Lighthouse sees the lighthouse activate, which if Kirby flies into the spotlight, his machine gets healed. Meteors causes, meteors to fall from the sky. I guess Astaroth got really angry that day. The Rowdy Charge Tank event gives the machines energy that causes them to turn white and move out of control. A huge pillar can occur, which can then be destroyed to release ability panels, items, and food. The rail stations can catch on fire. You can see an arena of light that can heal if you get there in time. Item bounces causes items to bounce, which is really annoying. And so is the event that gives all boxes containing the same item. That's really annoying. As we also see a very event where there is a mysterious, you know, area open up in the Grand Castle Hall. You can see a giant UFO appear on the air with a bunch of good patches on top. And, all of this adds a bunch of flavor to this game mode. After the city segment ends, you will then go to a stadium match, which is a bit of a random challenge that hopefully you got the right machine for, and as well as upgraded the right statistics. First is Air Glider, which these contestants are tasked with gliding as far as possible before hitting the ground. Destruction Derby, which should have been called Destruction Kirby, sees you have to KO each other as many times as possible in a minute and 30 seconds. Drag Race is not what you think it is, but rather a race in a straight line with few to no obstacles. Hope you got a lot of speed, because you're probably not winning this if you don't. High Jump is kind of like Air Glider, but focuses more on height than distance. Kirby Melee sees you have to kill as many enemies within a minute and a half. It's actually really fun to just try and hit as many of these little guys as you can possibly do in a set amount of time. Single Race is pretty self-explanatory. Target Flight is perhaps the most interesting, as you have to go off a ramp and hit one of these panels, which can give either 10, 30, and 50 points. There's also a 100 point one as well, but it is partially covered on occasion by a sort of metal covering, and so if you don't time it right, you'll get nothing. It's honestly a really fun game. And last but not least, we got Versus King Deity, which sees you and the other players having to KO Deity using items, and defeating him in under a minute unlocks him as a playable character in a free run mode of City Trial. Overall, these were all really fun and enjoyable to see the variety and all the challenges you might get. There are numerous items as well throughout the game, starting with stuff in all modes. There is a copy chance wheel, which is basically something that gives a random ability. Top right has its own unique items, like Big Cake, which makes, the player big and can flatten foes. Charge tank is a battery that improves the player to perform a full boost. Bomb allows him to toss up to 6 bombs. Why is this not how the bomb ability works in, the main mode? Astounds me. Buzzsaw gives the player 2 buzzsaws on the side. Drill allows Kirby to attack opponents in the front. Fire allows him to release a flamethrower, as well as leave a bit of a trail of flames behind him, which can harm opponents. Freeze Fan allows Kirby to freeze enemies in front. Hammer has him swing a hammer around. Invincible Candy turns him invisible. Krakow summons Krakows who target random opponents. The missile functions like the red shell. Party Ball releases a bunch of random items. Smoke Screen summons smoke behind the player, which causes others to lose control. Speed Down puts a wheel in the back, causing him to slow down. Luckily can be passed on to others. There's Speed Up, which is the opposite, giving you a rocket that causes you to speed up. Spinner gives you the ability to do an extended quick spin when he boosts. Step Broom is basically a trip mine, causing whoever goes over it to be knocked away. And then Walkie functions like Mike. Chicken causes all the opponents to lose control for a time and become dizzy. The Lantern clouds the entire racecourse in darkness except around the racer, who grabs it. It is great. Who Paint is the exact opposite, making all racers invisible, which is just horrible. Last but not least, you got Chicky, which is this sort of little chick thing that causes the others to become dizzy. It's fine, I guess. Overall, none of these items are very memorable or impactful due to their short nature of a lot of these courses, but luckily the items in City Trial are much more interesting. Most of these can be found either sitting on the ground or within certain boxes. Blue boxes contain mostly common items, red boxes contain copy abilities and pieces of either the Dragoon or Hydra, and the green boxes contain temporary items that are more important when dealing with other foes in City Trial. Of the items themselves, there's, returning stuff like food, which heals a little health, the energy drink that heals more, and the Maxim tomatoes that are full heal. Then you got the patches, which increase certain aspects when collected. And these are, mostly pretty self-explanatory. HP patch increases the machine's HP. Offense patch increases offense. Charge patch increases the charging rate. Defense patch increases defense. Turn patch increases handling. Top speed patch increases vehicle top speed. Boost patch increases acceleration and boosting power. Weight patches increases weight. And the glide patch increases gliding abilities. All have fake counterparts that are relatively easy to tell apart. The all-up patch is the rarest and increases all of the abilities by 1 unit. There's the Gordo spikes, which allow Kirby, aka the player, to toss 3 huge Gordos at opponents. Sensor Bomb is, a landmine. Panic Spin causes him to automatically do spins for a period of time. Fireworks allow him to shoot fireworks out of a cannon for a period of time. Rowdy Charge Tank causes the machine to go into overcharge, basically going very fast and effectively losing control. No Charge is the opposite, where you cannot charge temporarily. This completely immobilizes the Bulk Star and the Hydra, by the way, so you might want to avoid it if you got either of these things. Speed Down temporarily slows the machine. The Mach Attack, Mach Guard, and Mach Speed temporary boost attack, defense, and speed, respectively. The Invincibility Candy gives him temporary invincibility. And overall, I love all of these items, and while they're not all the most useful, I do think they add further complexity and depth and flavor to the City Trial mode. Overall, the gameplay of this game may on the surface level seem simple, and in some ways it is. How everything is done by the A button, and that can admittedly cause a few issues, but it wasn't enough to put me off or really hurt my experience. But there's actually a surprising depth to it, and there is a learning curve, but, given this is a Kirby game, it's not too bad, but I think there is enough complexity here that adds a lot of depth that will really make this game fun to play. I mean, if you don't believe there's a lot of depth, look at the length of this segment of this video compared to all my previous Kirby spin-off reviews. Anyway, I think this gameplay of this game is overall pretty good. Now that we've covered the gameplay, let's talk about the presentation, starting with that which is most obvious of the two, the graphics. Alright, so this is the only Kirby game for the GameCube, and it definitely has a very unique visual language that is not seen on non GameCube games. Each racetrack in the main mode is visually distinct. Fantasy Meadows is the beginner Green Greens type course, and is the shortest of them with an very long, elongated ring shaped path that is, very interesting, as it does have a bit of a brief cave segment as well as windmills, which are, kind of cool to see, and serves as a good introduction to the controls of the game. Celestial Valley is much longer, more meandering and dangerous due to branching paths and bottomless pits. It has a really neat enchanted valley vibe. You think there's going to be like elves or somewhere. Sky Sands is a more, technically complex map with hidden passageways and moving platforms. And, it does have a typical sandy area that can be a little stereotypical, but has fossilized coral reefs in it, which are always really cool to see. Then there is Frozen Hillside, which, in many regards is very similar to your typical ice level, but it manages to stand out thanks to the many tunnels and tubes. Magma Flow resembles Mustafar with many branching paths, and is, in my opinion, one of the more generic visually in terms of design, but it still has a charm. Machine Passage is a very mechanical course, specifically the most mechanically advanced of the courses with numerous hazards and boost panels, as well as a very sort of post-apocalyptic vibe. Beanstalk Park is a very winding course set in the sky. I found both of these to be quite visually striking, but I don't really have much to say about them. Checker Knights is weird. It's also the longest course in the game, being set in a very unusual, abstract castle region that really doesn't make any sense at all. The Nebula Belt is like Rainbow Road, with no enemies and few obstacles, and mostly relies on the player's skill at going fast. Overall, it's a very bright stage. The top right courses are all simple, but have clear, distinct designs that are honestly not much to talk about. Their names are very simple, which honestly reflects their simple design. There's grass, sand, sky, fire, light, metal, and water. The last of which is notable for having a Kaboo statue design from the Kirby anime in the background, which is neat and one of the few references that, are not just music related, which I'll get to in a little bit. City Trials City is really fun, but a bit chaotic in design. Like, seriously, why would you build a town right next to a volcano? But overall, the graphics of this game are interesting and honestly are pretty good. It's a slightly more grounded take on a Kirby game, and it comes from probably the slightly muted color schemes, which some might dislike, but I actually kind of enjoy this game. I think it has definitely a unique GameCube design aesthetic. Now that we've covered the graphics, let's go on to the second half of the presentation, the music, and see if that has aged well. Alright, so in terms of music, there's something I want to talk right off the bat, and that you may not know this unless you've watched some of my anime reviews, but quite a number of music tracks from this game also appeared in the anime. The most notable ones being the theme from Checker Knights, which always showed up when Kirby was about to do something major, and it does sound great here. The city theme is really good, though you might recognize it from Smash Brothers more than this game or the anime. The Frozen Hillside theme is really interesting. It starts as kind of a disco before going into a haunting, whispery Christmas jingle. It showed up in episode 86 of the anime, which aired a month before, you know, this game, making it
predating this video game in some ways. Magma Flows is a really intimidating theme with a very octave aesthetic and fits the sort of Mordor theme of that stage. Also, it showed up in the finale of the anime where it fit well the, tensity of that specific set of episodes. It should be stressed that while I started with this segment mostly talking about the themes that showed up in the anime, the stuff that's unique to this game is also solid. The intro music and the music for the menus are all, really fitting. The theme for Machine Passage is very sinister, mechanical tracked, with an intro that sounds like an engine being revved up. Sky Sands has a distinctly Middle Eastern, Arabian Nights vibe. The Celestial Valley has a very airy theme, as long as the, you know, track it's part of. I also have to say that the theme for Nebula Belt was pretty astounding and really feels vicarious in nature. Overall, the OST of this game is pretty good, with a number of fun tracks that were nice to listen to, and I wish they'd come back more. But now let's go on to the foes that Kirby will face on this adventure and see what we can learn from those. Alright, so it should be said that this boss doesn't really have bosses or mini bosses, unless you count the encounter against King Dedede in, City of Trial, but he's just a repackaged player AI, and really, these computer controlled opponents are the only genuine threats in the game, unless you're having people play it with you, in which case they might be even more of a threat. But there's still some interesting stuff to talk about the common enemies that are in this game. First, you got the enemies with no abilities, and you got several returning foes, including Bronto Burt, Broom Hatter, Cappy, Dynablade, Gordo, Scarfy, Tack, and Waddle Dee.
There's also some new copy ability-less enemies. First is Ant Doom, which has a pretty cool name and is an olive green antlion slash worm that will grab Kirby if they go over the pit he's in. There's actually a checklist objective to get caught by the ant tomb 20 times in one game, and another to be caught 50 times or more overall. It's kind of neat. I wish it'd come back again, but far more interesting is Dale, a little goober that lights up dark areas and can injure Kirby with a light. I like the design, but it sadly does not reappear as an actual enemy in any future games. But with the copy ability bearing enemies, we see a lot more interesting stuff. First, you got several returning foes. There's Chili that gives freeze, and Naughty that gives sleep, Sword Knight that gives sword, Plasma Wisp gives plasma, Walkie the microphone gives mic, and Wheelie gives wheel. In addition, there are 5 new foes. There's Balloon Bomber, which is a shark-faced missile wearing a skull mask. He gives bomb. And then there is Collar, which is like a caterpillar fairy thing that flies in a tornado and gives tornado. Flapper is a multicolored pterodon that I really like the design of and gives wing. There's Heat Fan Fan, a really odd creature that seems to be related to the mini-boss Fan Fan and gives fire. It's cool, I like the little tusks it has. There's Pachikikuri, which is a bird that gives needle. Honestly, I wish these guys could return, as I think they'd fit right in with modern Kirby games as a common enemy. Overall, the enemies of this game are perhaps not the grandest to deal with, but they have a lot of charm to them, and I kind of hope they return someday. Let us now go over the completion requirements, as well as my final thoughts on this game as we wrap up this video. Alright, so for 100% completion, the requirements might be a bit familiar, as they are these 3 checklists, which are a design you might recognize from some of the more recent Super Smash Bros. Games. Each of these checklists have 120 boxes for the air ride mode, and then one for the top rider mode, and then for the city trial road, leading to a total of 360 objectives for the entire game, each with highly specific directions. Now, I'm not going to go over each of them because, frankly, this video would be another hour long, and I've already covered a lot of them, more notable ones. But there are some notable unlocks. There's rides. You also can get some new color variants like green, purple, brown, and white. I kind of wish they gave, a black variant. I thought, and a teal one, but I think the unlocks are fair enough for what they are. You only have to technically unlock 100, each in order to complete the quote-unquote game mode of each respective one, but I'll be honest, I think if you really want to get the most out of this game, you should go out and get all 120 for each of the 3 checklists. And, each of the checklists will turn gold, which is, pretty neat. It's a lot, and depending on how much of a completionist, it could take you up to 130 hours, if not more, to get all these checklist things. And to be fair, that is if you do nothing but play the game. I mean, if you're like me and have a job, it'll probably take a little longer. Though once you finish it, I have to admit there really isn't anything for a single player really to do. This is a game whose longevity requires multiple people, which can be a problem if you have no friends or if you don't have a way to play the GameCube multiplayer. And, it's here that I see the main issue with this game, that being the lack of solid stuff for a single player really to do if they're not a completionist, and that's just not a good thing for any game, spin-off or otherwise. You want something that is solid enough that both a single player and a multiplayer can enjoy. I really think it was the lack of the story mode that prevented what could have been an overall 100% perfect game, in my opinion at least, and kind of relegates it to a bit of a lower grade, in my honest opinion. Regardless of it not being perfect in my eyes, I think this is still the best Kirby spin-off game that I've reviewed so far for this sort of series. It's well worth trying out if you are a Kirby fan or even a generalized gamer, though I would say that if you want the best experience of this, you really need to get up some of your friends to play it with. Also, given this game sort of is in that state where it's not old enough to be classic, but also not new enough to be like a current game, it's never really been re-released, so you might have to pay a bit to get it, which can be a turnoff, but I think that if you're willing to bite the bullet on the price, you will find a great time, especially if you can get some friends. Anyway, I'm the Dark Master. If you liked this video, like it. If you loved it, consider liking and subscribing. Take care and have a wonderful day, and I'm sorry that this video didn't quite get out as soon as I wanted it, but I hope you understand that this was due to several real life stuff that couldn't really help. But anyway, take care.